Hello, everyone in Internet Land. This is the Mother Brain, and I'm back with another podcast review here on Coast Blog. And today we are going to be discussing The Equalizer, starring Denzel Washington. And this is the adaptation of the 1980s CBS series, which starred the late great Edward Woodward. And this is a film that's taken about 8.5 years in the making to get from script to screen. So we're going to get into a little backstory on the Equalizer television series and the new film and my thoughts on it after seeing it last night. So for those of you who are not familiar with the original show, the Equalizer was at a time when the New York City crime rate was very high and New York was a completely different environment than the Disneyland that it is today. This was at the time when Times Square was full of porn and bad exploitation movie theaters and prostitution, drugs, etc. And the Equalizer was very popular at the time because here was a character in the form of Robert McCall who is protecting those in need who feel that the odds are stacked against them, and always putting an ad in the paper for those who need to call him for his expertise. And at the same time, he's also a former government agent who's sick and tired of killing for state and wants to try to protect those in need, and finds that it's a way for him to atone for his sins. And the great thing about Woodward in the role was his quiet attitude towards dangerous situations. He wasn't Charles Bronson. He wasn't this gruffy guy carrying big guns all the time. He was a little bit more methodical in his approach. He was the kind of guy that looked like a distinguished butler for the most part, with the dapper suits, the British accent, very much a prim and proper upscale kind of person. But that's what made him so dangerous, because he was the kind of guy that could take on a street punk or a dirty cop or the mob, and they would completely underestimate him and his skills. So he was a guy that you didn't want to mess around with, and it proved to be very popular for the 4 seasons that it was on air. And Woodward himself was so believable in the part that people would come up to him on the street asking for his help, and because he is just an actor playing this role, he would give them a card of where to call for help if they were in trouble, like, just a self-help hotline of some sort. So the popularity of the show made it so that it had the potential to become a movie someday, and it took many years to get off the ground. Directors like Paul McGuigan, who works on Sherlock now, you also had the director of Drive, and Rupert Wyatt, who did Rise of the Planet of the Apes, were all at some point considered to direct. And I think the situation that they ran into was figuring out the proper direction for the film. Do you stick with an older British guy, or do you go with somebody a little bit younger and more commercial friendly? And eventually the creator of the show, Michael Sloan, got the rights over to Sony, and they hired the writer Richard Wenk, who wrote 16 Blocks with Bruce Willis, to pen the script and to try to make something that was different from the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, which I felt at the time was as close to an Equalizer movie as you could get. And somewhere down the line, they decided to think outside the box and say, well, what about Denzel Washington? And when I first heard about it, I was a little skeptical. And being a big Denzel fan and always being surprised with what he delivers as an actor, I still couldn't shake the image of Edward Woodward out of my head. Was he going to try to play British? And, he's played a lot of tough guy parts. I don't know if I could believe him as a distinguished type of personality that people underestimate. But again, I think I had to say I was surprised. And that leads me to what this film is about, which is this new take on Robert McCall is a former Black Ops agent who faked his death in a bombing accident and basically is now living in Boston trying to live a normal, quiet life. He works in like a Home Depot type of store. He reads books every night the same diner at 3 a.m. because he's trying to stay connected to his late wife by finishing off the list of the 100 books you're supposed to read before you die. And he has a very OCD complex, always using his stopwatch for everything he does, whether it's cleaning the dishes or shaving his head or, cutting boards at the job. And he just seems like a normal everyday person, a very blue collar kind of Boston guy. And then he comes across a situation with a character named Terry, played by Chloe Moretz, best known for Hit Girl in the Kick-Ass movies, but playing a completely different part this time around, who's like a young prostitute who befriends McCall and ends up in a situation where some Russian thugs do a little too much damage to her for the business that she does, and McCall ends up stepping into action reluctantly to avenge the beating of Terry. And of course, small problems become bigger problems in the Equalizer, and eventually he is brought to the attention of Teddy, who is a Russian assassin sent by the leader of the hubs in Boston of the Russian businesses to basically find McCall and take him out. And McCall has no choice but to ultimately revert back to his old ways in an effort to equalize things and to settle the odds. And basically with the Equalizer, that's the gist of the story. And one thing that I do like about the film is how, while it's centered around McCall and the Russians and their beef, it's also like the show in how once he swings back into action, he gets into some smaller situations, much like in the show, that he manages to resolve his way. There's a situation with guys who work in his store who run into, some typical trouble with thugs or dirty cops, and McCall using his expertise to dissolve those situations. And also the great thing about it, much like the show had its share of gunplay. McCall was the type of character in the television series who used all kinds of weaponry that he would hide around his apartment. If you remember, there were some episodes he'd have like a bookshelf, and then he'd pull off the bookshelf, there's like a bunch of rifles and Uzis in there. They kind of twist that around a little bit, and instead of making McCall a gunslinger, they make him a guy who doesn't really need guns, but whatever he has at his disposal, he could kill you with. So you go from the scene in the trailer where he confronts the Russian thugs in the office, and he can just pinpoint just about anything that they have, their chains, a corkscrew for wine, a glass of vodka, and he just kill everybody with it in under 20 seconds. And that's also the exciting part, is just the brutality of it, and also the fact that the build up to the violence is probably what makes the Equalizer work so well. It's the tension, as McCall always tries to find a way to avoid the violence, and when he has no other option, it just builds and builds until everything explodes. So it's not Expendables where it's just all out gunplay. This one's a little bit more methodical. This is a guy who is very quiet, very still, and he's not the type of person that just blows shit up and walks away, but he'll stab you in the neck and he'll just watch you die to your last breath, which is the genius of Denzel Washington in this film. Again, I wasn't sure if he could quite pull it off the way Woodward did, but I think he put his own spin on it. He looks like any person's dad or just an authority figure, but not, the angry black man type, but to be just an average Joe, and put him in some shit, he's gonna make your shit even worse. And all sorts of ways he tortures bad guys and puts them at arm's length to do some crazy things. That's what makes it so exciting to see. And also, again, with the supporting cast, Martin Sozak's playing Teddy is also equally as good as Denzel. He's not your typical villain. He's a little bit more almost like the doppelganger of McCall. He has his own methodical way of killing and resolving the situation that he's in, and being somebody that there's some chilling stuff in there, like when he interrogates one of the prostitutes in trying to find McCall. It's very unsettling and disturbing. It's not even so much what he does to the prostitute as it is sort of antagonizing her and getting the information out, because he's just that threatening by his look and his demeanor. And Chloe Moretz is not really in the film as much as the trailers make it out to be. She's only in there for maybe the first 20 minutes and then doesn't show up again to the last 20. And she serves her part well. She works well with Denzel. It's not her best role, but she's showing growth as an actress. I mean, certainly she's filling out, but she still, delivers, doesn't half-ass it. And you could tell that she really is somebody that you do care about when put into the situation she's in, and for McCall to connect with her and to basically bring him back into action. He also had some small appearances with Melissa Leo and Bill Pullman playing McCall's former friends from the Black Ops. And I think Leo's character is probably closer to the Control character played by Robert Lansing in the original series, who was McCall's old boss. She supplies the information to Robert McCall when he needs to find out who these Russians are, get their backstory. Again, she's just serviceable for the part that she's in, as is Bill Pullman, to just get the story moving along. But they're always a pleasure to watch, especially Bill Pullman, President and Independence Day. So maybe if there's a sequel, they'll probably get expanded on, and there's plenty of things that you could see there going forward. And of course, you have the direction of Antoine Fuqua. Now, this is a very underrated director who has not had the best of luck in the last couple of years. He and Denzel, of course, had their big moment with Training Day, winning Denzel the Oscar for Best Actor. And since that time, Fuqua, who showed a lot of promise back then in the early 2000s, seems to have fallen off because of bad choices and a lot of behind-the-scenes issues on the films he's done. Man on Fire, not Man on Fire, Tears of the Sun, he had some conflicts with his star Bruce Willis. He was originally supposed to direct American Gangster with Denzel, but scheduling conflicts as well as conflicts over the budget and the ambitious direction he wanted to take got him fired, and Ridley Scott replaced him. He also did Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, which was kind of an average action flick. Brooklyn's Finest with Don Cheadle, Wesley Snipes, and Richard Gere was trying to be Training Day 2.0, but didn't quite hit the mark. And then he managed to make a bit of a comeback with Olympus Has Fallen, which was pretty much popcorn entertainment, but surprisingly brutal and a lot of fun to watch on a Saturday afternoon. So to see him back with Denzel, you could see he's grown as a director in his visual style, and you could tell he takes cues from a lot of the directors that were initially attached to the film. So you could see why they wanted the director drive to make the movie, because it has very much that MTV 80s feel, much like the TV show. Very much poetry in motion is the best way I can put it, and he delivers. He doesn't hold back, and he just manages to make it brutal without it being over the top. And there are those times where you don't even need to see the violence, because you just already know McCall is such a badass that they could just do scenes without really showing what he does, but show the aftermath of it. So that's a lot of fun. And, in comparing it with the television series, now a lot of movies based on TV shows have not been all that successful, and there's always been those issues, whereas like Miami Vice had the problem of using the same characters, but despite having Michael Mann directing, it was very choppy, it was slow, and it lacked a certain amount of fun that the TV show had. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you had the A-Team, and that was Joe Carnahan's direction, where they tried to stay close to the show while still being a Joe Carnahan movie, but it lacked good villains, and it was just not quite hitting the mark in terms of making it the 18 popular again. It still had to stick with the familiar versus trying something new and different. With the Equalizer, if you're a fan of the show, there's a lot here that you're not going to get. So he doesn't drive a Jaguar. It's Boston, not New York. He doesn't have a British accent. He doesn't have a son from the Karate Kid. And he certainly isn't going to his agency all the time and, getting other operatives to help him out in the situations that he gets himself into. This is a totally different version of Robert McCall, who's very blue collar, very much a guy who is trying to blend in with society, and here he comes swinging into action reluctantly. And that's as much of what the show is taken from. Just the title, the name of the character, some little traits, and there's a little nod to the show at the end. But other than that, this pretty much feels like its own world and its own film, that if you call it anything else, then it probably would still be just as good. Although one would say that even if Denzel wasn't in it, it would probably be an average action movie. However, Denzel Washington just always surprises, always delivers, and he could take even the most tepid material and elevate it to varying degrees of greatness, because he just knows where to hammer home all the right points. So for this one, I'm going to give the Equalizer 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I thought it wasn't the most original concept in terms of being a vigilante movie, but Denzel elevates it, Fuqua delivers in direction, and it was just a lot of fun. And I hope if they do make a sequel that maybe there'll be some more nods to the show. Maybe you bring in his son. If they do that, you could have the other operatives from the show, like the Mickey Kosmeyer character, or bring in, maybe take him to New York and see what goes down there. There's a lot of ways they could go. If you've seen the show, I mean, a lot of dramatic stuff they could take McCall into and twist it around and make it quite surprising. So until next time, this is the Mother Brain, and you can follow me on Coast Blog, where you could check out my work as well as the work of my fellow contributors there, including the man himself, Coast. And you can follow me on Twitter at MotherBrain830. And I will see you next time, Internet Land.